Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Anacortes Planning Commission meeting of April 9th, 2025. And Ms. Gleichman, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Mills?
Present.
Commissioner McCombs? Commissioner Ryan?
Present.
Commissioner Martin?
Here.
Commissioner Stoneman?
Here.
Commissioner Dresky?
Here.
Commissioner Courier?
Okay, so we're missing two, but we have a quorum. That's a good thing. And I think we knew that the two, I think both said that they were not going to be here.
They did, so I would like to move that we make them excused absences.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, the motion by Mr. Stoneman, seconded by Mr. Dresky to excuse Mr. Courier and Mr. McCombs. Any discussion? All those in favor just signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, they are excused. All right, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item number 3 are minutes, and we have minutes from the October 30th, 2024 meeting. You had a chance to look them over. So is there a motion to approve them? Yeah.
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Gleichman. Okay. Item number 4 is public comment. Public comment is for anybody in the public who would like to speak to the Planning Commission about an item generally not on the agenda. We will be happy to have you come on up to the podium, give your name and your city, and we will give you 3 minutes to speak. Is there anyone online?
No.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Number 5 is public hearings. We don't have a public hearing tonight. Number 6 is other business. A, 2025 Comprehensive Plan Update, new draft climate element and goals and policies. And we have Mr. Coleman at the microphone.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. I'm John Coleman, I'm the Director of the Planning Community and Economic Development Department. So tonight we have from Makers, our consultant working on the climate element, both online we have Marcus Johnson, but in the House today we have Katie Saunders, who's going to be talking about our draft goals and policies for the new climate element that we are still drafting. We also have Beth Miller from Parametrics, who did a lot of the science of the background work that was presented to the Planning Commission last week. Sorry, not last week, at the last Planning Commission meeting where we talked about the background documents related to this element. So I'll just turn it over to Katie now to start. We're gonna turn on a PowerPoint presentation from Katie. And Beth, let us know, can you see this on the screen, or do we need to share this?
Looks great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Very good.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome back again, by the way.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. It was a wild ride home last time with all the lightning, and it was beautiful. So it's grateful to see sunny, or at least not stormy weather tonight. My name is Katie Saunders. I am with Makers, as John introduced, and I'm here tonight to talk about follow-up on our last presentation where we kind of presented the background and analysis work that went into the climate element, and tonight here to talk about the draft goals and policies and a little bit about how we got to that process. So our agenda is to kind of go over the process background. We're going to review the requirements again. We touched on these at the last meeting, but just wanted to review them again with a little more context and talk a little bit about the list development and feedback, and so what went into all the steps in getting to the list that you are looking at tonight. And then we'll have a draft list goal and policy discussion. I'm going to focus mostly on the goals just to kind of keep things moving, but we have all the policies kind of in the slides as well as the list information in front of you, so happy to stop on anything specifically that you want to discuss or have questions about, but just to provide some background. So that's the format of tonight's meeting. I'm going to start with the greenhouse gas inventory work and some of those requirements for the greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element. So I'm going to hand it over to Beth to cover the first few slides remotely, and then I'll step back in. Over to you, Beth.
Great. Thanks so much, Katie. All right. So last time we went over all of the sort of nitty-gritty science background, and now, okay, so what do we have to do for the GHG element of the climate element? First reduction is you have to have a plan that will result in reduction of overall greenhouse gas emissions, especially from transportation and land use. Also, so we're including in that also building energy. Requirement 2 is that it has to result in reductions in the per capita vehicle miles traveled. So depending on your growth rate, that may be an overall reduction or not. And it has to do that without increasing emissions elsewhere in the state. And then the final requirement is to prioritize reductions that benefit overburdened communities. So make sure that everybody gets to share in the benefits of pollution reduction and other co-benefits. All right, next. So last time I showed you this graphic showing sort of the projected, Anacortes' projected emissions, including all of the state actions, like including the internal combustion engine, gas car ban, Clean Fuels Act, Clean Buildings Act, Energy Code, clean electricity legislation. All of those things really go a long way towards reducing emissions overall, but there's still a sizable chunk there for Anacortes. And then I went through and just sort of did an estimate of what the sort of two biggest actions or two biggest levers that Anacortes can pull. So if you'll show the next one, just to give you a sense of scale of the effect of actions that you can take. So for example, here I looked at what would happen if all of the residential buildings switched from natural gas to electrical power over the next 20 years. And then looked at what would happen if the per capita VMT reduced by 20% by 2050, just as a sense of scale to understand, how big a lever you have to pull here. So you can see that even with these pretty big changes, we still don't get quite all the way down to the line, but that's a sizable chunk that Anacortes can affect. So do I want to pause for any questions here? Anybody?
Would you just repeat, so the two biggest bang for your buck, one has to do with building, and just repeat those two for me.
Yeah, so one of them is reducing, is basically fuel switching in buildings from natural gas furnaces to electrical heat pumps. So that's where a lot of that sort of bright blue band down at the bottom, that's your natural gas usage. So that's something that is sort of left over for cities to address, is that chunk of emissions. So that's one way that the city can actually get at reducing those natural gas emissions, is by electrifying air and air and water heat, where the technology is really, it's there, it's cost effective, things like that. And the second one is the effect of reducing VMT, so vehicle miles traveled per capita in the city by 2050. So 20% by 2050. Just for context, WashDOT's goal by 2050 is a 50% per capita reduction, but Anacortes is already relatively low VMT per capita, so this is, you know, a more reasonable reduction given Anacortes is already relatively low VMT.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay.
Okay, so next slide. So this is just sort of a view of like how your 2022, like emissions as they stand now, more or less. You can see that it's mostly building energy. So that's your electricity, that's your natural gas, any propane or fuel oil, if anybody's still on that, is all included in that building energy. And then the other big chunk is transportation energy. So that's your gas cars, that's your diesel, that's including all of the ferries and all the waterborne transportation. All of that sits in that transportation energy bucket. And so here I'm just highlighting there's only so much a community can really do to address their emissions. And so I'm highlighting here you know, the options that are really good options for that a community can actually do. So the first one here is switch residential air and water heat to electric. So again, this is one of those things where the technology is there, it's possible, it's usually cost effective. So that's sort of a winner. And then the next thing to do is to increase local renewables, right? If you're going to switch everybody from natural gas to electricity, that electricity needs to be greener. So the state's already taking action to decrease electricity emissions, but local renewables such as rooftop solar is another like relatively big lever that the community itself can pull. The next one is switch commercial and industrial heat to electric where possible. So there's some applications, again, you know, heat pump to heat up your commercial space or your office building or your restaurant. That's very technologically achievable. There's other ones that are a little bit more difficult to achieve. Anything that requires really high heat or things like that can be hard to electrify. But some of those emissions are relatively easy to address with heat pumps. So those are sort of the big levers to pull on the building energy side, and then for the transportation energy side, the city can really work on reducing VMT through their land use decisions. Right, where do people live? Is it close to the places that they need to go so that they don't have to drive a lot? So that's really sort of definitely within the city's wheelhouse. The second one, especially relevant for Anacortes, is to support the use of renewable diesel. You've got a sizable diesel chunk of emissions. And so renewable diesel has, you know, is R99, 99% renewable sources, 1% fossil sources. So that really cuts down, can really bring down diesel associated emissions, especially in sectors that are hard to do battery electric, right? So there are some things that we don't have a good solution for yet. Renewable diesel can sort of provide a bridge there. And then finally, support EV infrastructure. So there's lots of legislation and lots of sort of social change going on with increased adoption of EVs. But people need a place to charge them, especially people that don't live in single family homes with garages or driveways. So the city can help make it easier for people to adopt EVs by thoughtfully adding chargers in destinations where people might might be driving a long distance from, or in workplaces, or in multifamily housing. All right. Any questions there?
Doesn't appear to be.
I'm just sort of giving you the punch list. If I had to come up with a climate action plan all on my own, that's what everyone should do. So communities where GHG emissions reduction sub-element is required must help meet the state's requirements of net zero emissions by 2050. There's interim targets can help us like figure out how to get there. And the city is trying to take a lead, right? It's trying to sort of show that that they are going to lead lead the community and make sure that they are keeping their own house in order. But there's still a lot that community members are going to need to do, right? The city can't be like replacing everybody's furnace, for example, or city can't tell people what cars to buy. So there's definitely a lot of room for action within the community on that. Right?
Any questions on that? Thanks, Beth. I think Beth is going to stick around. That's the end of her presentation, but she'll stick around for questions for the goals and policy section. Two things I wanted to highlight on this slide particularly is the mention of interim targets. And when we were meeting with the climate team, there was some discussion of whether targets would be helpful to kind of guide those actions. And so it was determined there's no need to select as a city an interim target. The kind of overall target is set by the state to like get to that net zero by 2050. There's no need to set interim targets along, the way for that in terms of requirements, but city staff felt it would be helpful within certain areas. So for electrifying the city's fleet or certain actions the city would take to have some guidance. So the team is still working on that. We don't have kind of information on that ready to share tonight, but we're happy to report back once the team has gotten that information pulled together. But it will be specific to kind of key areas to guide staff actions.
Excuse me, so when you're talking about the team, are you talking about the climate team again?
Sorry, it was the consultant team. Yeah, we're sort of
Okay.
providing some additional information
Yeah.
and background to help guide. And I think the thinking is, particularly around electric vehicles, one of the recommendations we'll be talking about is kind of doing that transition planning. So what this effort can do is set some initial ideas of targets where we think the city should head, and that could be further studied and kind of ground truth through those subsequent planning actions that should the city decide to take that on. So we're kind of providing that initial guidance out of this effort, but there'll be an opportunity to kind of revise those moving ahead. The other thing I wanted to point out, I didn't get my mic turned on I'm just going to skip back to this, just to make sure the key takeaway of this slide is, so as Beth has applied these local actions to the slide, you still see that there's color kind of above the line. So I think the key message here is that this applies some of the key actions that we've identified thus far in the draft list of goals and policies, and it really sets the city on a good path towards reducing emissions, but it's not the whole story. It doesn't get you all the way there, and I think that's a key message to understand as you're kind of thinking about what this list is, to say that there's going to be more work ahead to address some of these emissions where the tools aren't fully there yet, but we have put the list together to kind of take a good jump at what is available currently and kind of align. But that's a key challenge in this work, is that sometimes there are those emissions that are harder to bring down and that need to have kind of work over time to address those. All right, so for the resilience sub-element, kind of switching gears a little bit, I wanted to, again, review the minimum requirements. I know this is review from the last meeting, but just want to make sure it's clear, because in this entire work, there's a lot of tracking going on of like which of these goals and policies meet which requirements, and we'll talk about how we've been doing that and tracking that as we go. So the first requirement is to address natural hazards created or aggravated by climate change, and the list of this is here, so it's including, but that list is really determined by the analysis work that we did, and so I'll show the ones that we're kind of really focused on for this effort, but it's specific to the local climate impacts that you've identified through this planning process. Requirement 2 is to identify, protect, and enhance natural areas to foster climate resilience, as well as areas of vital habitat for safe species migration. So nature-based solutions is a word that gets used a lot, or green infrastructure, but this is kind of using the existing natural areas and making sure that they are well buffered and able to provide that first line of defense. And then requirement 3 is to identify, protect, and enhance community resilience to climate impacts, including social, economic, and built environment factors, which support adaptation to climate impacts consistent with environmental justice. And one key point for requirement 1 is that you have to have a goal and a policy for each of the climate-exacerbated hazards that you've identified in your planning process. So of that list of what are the local climate impacts, we need to have goals and policies that address each of those. But also the Commerce goal and policy measures that we've been drawing from and working with address multiple hazards in one. So you have to meet each of them with a measure. You have to make sure you're tracking to have measured a goal and a policy that will meet at minimum each of those local impacts, but many of those can be applied to multiple impacts. So that's kind of the part of that more complex calculus as we're putting this all together and tracking whether we've met the requirements. The other thing I wanted to highlight that we didn't touch base on much is just the SMP, or the Shoreline Master Program nexus. So there are a lot of policies, there's a close relationship and a lot of overlap with climate planning and the Shoreline Master Program. And so there's a lot of need to consider that future update alongside. I think Anacortes is a little bit of a unique situation where you're still kind of confirming the last update. Many communities, we were sort of in this climate element planning process, we've reviewed the existing, the one that's currently kind of underway, to identify any needs, but also identified future update needs moving into the next update cycle. The Department of Ecology is currently developing some guidance or finalizing some guidance to help communities with that next round of SMP updates, but that guidance isn't fully available yet. So there's interim guidance now that we were coordinating with to develop this climate element. But just know that there's some work around the SMP with that next update. We've gotten a start in reviewing in this process, but in the next update, there'll be additional work to be done there. Any questions on that?
I have a question about the Shoreline Master Program. I think I'm right. The one that we're going by is 2010, something like that. And when is the new one due?
So the city was working on a new one, and it's for all intents and purposes done. It was put on hold during some appeals of some related information, and then we need to bring it back. So, but we're not going to bring it back during the comp plan process because it would complicate the process a little bit. So after the comp plan is done, then we can go back and finish up the revisions, to the final revisions to the Shoreline Master Program, and we'll go through a public process for that again and bring it back.
So it doesn't have an exact due date?
No.
I remember reading that 2026 is when there'll be more guidance from the Department of Ecology, so that's why I'm wondering.
I'm not sure when the due date was. I think it may have passed, but Ecology knows what's going on, and they're, I just don't know. I apologize.
Okay.
I don't know when the due dates were.
Okay. We'll go through a similar process like we're doing with the comp
Well,
plan.
most of the process has been done, and all of the documents are on the webpage. So we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for further public review, just because it's been so long since it was last seen in public. So we'll
Or
bring
by
it
the
back.
commissioners. Okay.
Chairman Martin,
Yes.
Katie, could refresh my memory, the minimum requirements that are on this page, and I think there was 3 on a previous page that were cited as, that's going back to the House Bill 11,
1181, yeah.
Okay.
Those are the minimum requirements.
and since we're less than 25,000, that doesn't exempt us. These are still minimum requirements regardless of our size?
That's my understanding. Yeah, that's my understanding. We can go back and check, but yeah, that's through the Commerce guidance to.
Just FYI, I looked that up, the 1181 today, for counties that are over 100,000, and we are at 131,000. So it does apply to us.
So we're umbrellaed under the
Yes.
county criteria rather than our standalone criteria.
As far as I know, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so these are the local climate hazards, and I know I've gone over these at length, so we're not going to kind of touch on them, but this is when we're talking about needing to have a goal and policy for each of them. This is just a reminder for each of these, we need to make sure we have a goal or policy that's going to cover. But the good news is it's not necessarily, siloed, or that there's ways that they can do both. So extreme heat or sea level rise, there's ways to kind of address both of those with goals and policies, and that's what we've done. I didn't present a detailed accounting of how I have some notes in my notes. If there's questions of how we're meeting each, we are tracking that on the side. I didn't want to drown folks with information that was going to create confusion. So we're more sticking to just the draft language tonight, but we are happy to follow up with that tracking once we're kind of through tonight's presentation, if there's a desire to see that.
I think we have the tracking.
The tracker has some of the information as to how it meets some of those minimum requirements,
Right.
so you have a sense. Yeah, you have a visibility of it, but just not the kind of full the spreadsheet.
But the plan is not to go through those policies tonight?
We'll be going through those policies tonight. Yeah.
Okay.
There's additional things to track, I guess what I'm trying to say. Those are the main ones, but those are the key track and main requirements, but there's a lot of nuances within that that's a little hard to tease out of the tracker that we put some information into the tracker, but didn't want to drown you with, with all the information. The other piece I wanted to touch on tonight is the sectors and local assets. Also covered this at the last meeting, but in the Commerce guidance, they've identified a series of 11 climate planning sectors and really encourage communities to include measures that address all of them. So we've been trying to follow that guidance. That's not a requirement, but following that guidance. And they also recommended kind of structuring the climate element a little bit per that organization. So that was the approach we took in sort of the order that you have. But that also is not a requirement. So if you have questions about the order, I think the Commerce guidance is covering a lot of communities. Some communities have the requirement to do the greenhouse gas inventory or greenhouse gas emissions sub-element, but not all do. So there's an opportunity to look overall at the list you have to see, is this the most legible for future planning purposes? But that was the approach we took to develop it. It kind of reflects lightly this climate sector structure. And finally, another slide that I sort of presented at the last meeting, but just sort of all of that work to identify assets, and then those maps that we shared to sort of identify vulnerability, to sort of look at those assets and understand where are the key aspects of vulnerability that we really want to make sure that the goals and policies address. So SR20 and flood risks in low-lying coastal areas, water resources, a key issue, but the city has done some proactive planning here already. So that's good, so continuing those efforts, you'll see in the list tonight. The wastewater treatment facility, need for future planning in that due to vulnerabilities around at that site. The wildland-urban interface, that's what WUI acronym is, areas, which are areas designated by the state and state DNR in terms of where there can be associated with higher wildfire risk, and then known higher risk areas around the Anacortes community forest lands per some Skagit county plans and wildfire prevention plans. Extreme heat vulnerabilities that emerged from the analysis that we did with parametrics. And then multiple impacts to local ecosystems, so just multiple ways local ecosystems are under stress from climate impacts. Ecosystems within the Anacortes community forest have some buffers in terms of just shaded, so they're a little bit protected. So also understanding the value that Anacortes community forest brings to the community, not only for the kind of emissions reduction, the carbon sink that we identified in the analysis, but also protecting and buffering some of those natural systems that are within those lands, as well as all the wonderful public and recreation aspects. And then finally, the cumulative impact on human health and well-being, that sort of idea that there can be ways that these kind of build on one another and exacerbate those impacts for human health. Okay, So in terms of, I'm going to talk a little bit about the format of the climate element. So commerce guidance allows some flexibility. Communities can either have a standalone element, so just regular chapter like all your other elements, or they can choose to integrate the climate policies into every other element and have kind of climate sections within each. The standalone element aligned best with the process and timelines that we've gone through because the climate element is sort of coming in a little later than some of the other elements have been identified. But we did take a sort of step towards integration by identifying cross-references. And so in the tracker, that column that's all the way on the right, I'm not going to show the tracker much tonight, but you have it in your packets, and I have a copy here. I can kind of highlight. I think it might be on the computer here if we need to switch screens. That column identifies where we're cross-referencing out and had sort of strong connections with either existing policies or policies we were recommending. If you made a small update here, you would have a really strong link. So that's one way we felt we could kind of take a step toward that deeper integration of the climate element. And then in the future, the city could explore full integration with future updates if they wanted to have a climate element fully integrated into the comprehensive plan. But just wanted to understand or provide some description of the process that we took, because different communities may take different approaches to that. So we're sort of the first round that these are emerging from these requirements. Any questions about that? Okay. Nope. All right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of the list. And there's a lot of talking about a list. You just want to get to the list. So. Our starting point after the analysis phase, working from the measures that were identified by Commerce, as well as existing policies. As in our plan audit that began this process, we identified that the city already had some really strong climate policies in place. And so we sourced those and pulled some of those into the guiding principles, but also kind of worked on building and expanding those to align with the guidance coming out from Commerce. And by doing that, we were able to take advantage of the work that Commerce had done to make sure that the measures that were selected were measurable, that were effective, that would meet all the requirements. So it's sort of built in work and research done in that phase. But Commerce doesn't expect communities to only use those measures. They encourage communities to edit, to make changes, to make them fit to the needs of their community. So you'll see that we have done that. In the tracker, we have kind of what the source information was for each of the policies, and then how it's evolved to meet the needs of the local Anacortes community. We then discussed the priorities with the climate team. We took this Climate Policy Explorer tool as a tool that's available on the Commerce website. So we shared that. We kind of did a walkthrough of the list and identified a much longer list of things that were priorities that were we thought resonated with Anacortes based on our research and work and analysis work. And then we brought those to the climate team and really had broad discussions, really focused first on the emissions greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element, and then the resilience sub-element. So we kind of spent a whole meeting on one, a whole meeting on the other, to make sure that we were kind of digging into that. And then from those discussions, we developed a draft list. We shared it first with the city staff to make sure we were consistent and heading in the right direction there, and there weren't any concerns with that kind of longer list. And then we brought that to the climate team to have another discussion. And I think that list was longer in terms of overall. It was like 108 policies or something. So it's a much longer list in its draft form to identify the range of options that could be for this list. We then went to the open house and shared some of the emerging priorities from that draft list. So at the goal level, it was sort of largely the goals, but not exactly the goal text. Sometimes we pulled from the specific policies just so folks could understand what we were trying to do within those policies. But very high level, not necessarily the full list at that point because we hadn't fully released it yet. And then we revised that list based on all of that feedback and then arrived at the list that we're sharing with you and continuing to track the requirements throughout that process. So that's kind of the work that's gone in up to now. The climate team's feedback from that longer list was just reduce the length of the working draft list. So we've done that by removing and consolidating policies, simplifying a numbering structure, suggesting some updates to existing policies. So in some cases we thought, this actually we could just move this to environment and conservation or to land use. And it's an easy update there, and then we can kind of link to it from the climate element, but that's a better approach in this for this step or to achieve the same goal. We also revised and updated the language to incorporate feedback from the climate team on specific areas. We have a couple of goals that were added based on those conversations or refined. And then reflects the Anacortes context. Done our best with that. I'm sure there's probably more ways we can do that in terms of making sure the goals and policies really relate to the local context, and would love feedback on that tonight. And then we talked a little bit earlier about that, identifying some initial targets for greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and policies to guide staff. So we're going to be sharing that when we have the full climate element to present. I just wanted you to be aware of that, so when you come back, like, what are these targets? Why didn't we talk about these earlier? So, but again, they'll be specific to key areas, just really to guide next steps for staff. Wanted to talk a little bit, oh yeah.
Quick question. You said when we have the full climate element, do we not have the full climate element?
The goals and policies are the bulk of it, but the way Anacortes' comprehensive plan is structured, you have the kind of goals in volume 1. So you can think of tonight is volume 1, and then volume 2 is all the kind of background information. But because this is a new element, it is somewhat new information that you haven't had before. So we want to put that together and then share that. Make sure you have a chance to see that so you understand what it is. It's not other than things like those targets, which will be new. Everything else is just a summary of the greenhouse gas inventory and key findings, the vulnerability work. Okay. And then we're trying to identify some, in that guidance for staff, some kind of key priority actions or key next steps to kind of guide, the implementation over time. But by and large, the vast majority you've already seen kind of presented in long form, and it'll just be making sure that's available fully to the public in that draft and legible, so folks understand how the goals and policies are grounded in that analysis. Okay. So feedback from the open house, just wanted to cover this. I touched on these and you saw boards, and for those of you who attended, also saw in person. The highest votes went to measures or priorities related to ecosystems, protecting and restoring streams and wetlands was the top. Enhancing urban forests also got a lot of support. There's also a fair amount of support for promoting energy efficiency and small-scale renewable energy. So those are the second board there. You can kind of see this is all just counting the dots. And we gave participants multiple dots, so they didn't have to only pick 2 or 3. We gave them, I think, 12. There were 24, I think, total things they could choose from. So they were making some choices, but there was also, the intent wasn't to select just a few. It was really just to show kind of broad level what was most popular. Also had support for incentivizing private development to promote green energy and sustainable design, and promoting local solar and small-scale renewable energy. All the priorities received at least 3 votes, so there was none that got nothing. There were multiple votes for fewer votes than some of the other leading ones, but still multiple votes for promoting community health and social networks, and promoting infrastructure and emergency preparedness. So not as high as some of the others, but still, a significant number of votes. And then economic development goals and policy, goals and priorities, those were a little less than some of the others, but still had multiple votes for those boards. So it gives you a sense that there is sort of a broad sense of support, at least at that meeting. Any questions on that? Okay. So the draft list overview, we have just a quick summary stats, and this is similar to the memo that we provided in the packet. There are 15 total goals and 59 policies. 35 of them are high priority measures from the Commerce guidance. So those were ones that Commerce wanted to see communities kind of prioritize as they were selecting. So when we were talking about why we went to the Commerce measures and we're really utilizing that, it was not only to capitalize on that research, but also incorporate those kind of high priority measures that they'd already identified. So we did have a number of those throughout the list. We're meeting the requirements for all the minimum requirements, and we're covering all climate planning sectors with at least a policy. We don't have a goal for each of the climate planning sectors, but we have a policy at least for all the sectors, and that's just in the guidance, not a minimum requirement. The S&P overlap we talked about, and might be some more conversation around that shoreline, but there will be more requirements kind of emerging for the S&P, so the city needing to figure out in the timing if the next S&P, if the next SMP update follows the comprehensive plan, what the timing of those updates are. And then one thing we didn't put in the tracker, again, just to limit or just sort of control a little, or not control, but just manage the information that we were sharing and asking people to focus on, was just that many of these climate goals and policies have a number of co-benefits. The list on the right side of the screen there is just the potential co-benefits that Commerce has identified. So, some of them overlap with the other elements so that they can work with both the emissions reduction, or they also kind of provide some resilience. And then different aspects of, improving salmon recovery, promoting economic development, saving money, or cost saving. So there's a number of benefits. We haven't tracked all of these. We will be tracking these in terms of at the end once we have the final list and sharing that with staff and be sharing that in the climate element. But just wanted you to be aware that if there's interest in understanding that more, we can provide that information. And in the list so we shared with you a draft list, more of a simplified form, and then the overall climate tracker. And in the kind of column that I've highlighted in blue here, the CE and the sub-elements, so both on your draft list and on the climate tracker, if it has two kind of greenhouse gas and resilience listed, that kind of reflects that co-benefit, where the policies have some co-benefits for each emissions each sub-element, climate sub-element. In the minimum requirements, the E indicates that it's meeting the emissions requirement, and an R indicates it's meeting a resilience sub-element requirement. And generally, they fall into one category or the other. A few we're wondering about whether they meet both, but in general, the Commerce guidance had them as one or the other. So the minimum requirement tracker is a better indicator of kind of which sub-element and which requirements each of the measures meet, or each of the goals and policies meet. So just wanted you to understand that we probably can clean that up a little bit to make that a little easier to track, but the minimum requirement column is where we're really kind of seeing where they meet. And where I've highlighted it in yellow, it just meant that this was a policy that emerged, either it was an existing policy you had, or it was a policy the team identified, so it isn't tied to Commerce guidance. The consultant team feels that it does meet the minimum requirements, but it's just, we wanted to differentiate that in our tracking from Commerce's guidance, just so that we understand that if that's the only way we're meeting that requirement, we want to be really sound about that. Any questions about that? Sorry that it ended up a little confusing there. I was like, as I was putting this presentation together, I want to just explain the two, because I think most of the way Commerce has structured it, that the goals and policies either meet one sub-element or another, but they might have co-benefits for the other. All right, and finally, environmental justice considerations. So priorities that emerge, maybe questions about how to think about environmental justice for each in those, because each of the sub-elements have different, but a minimum requirement that relates to environmental justice. So priorities that emerge from the vulnerability analysis and the climate team discussions, where the climate should support and promote affordable housing. That's a key need in vulnerable populations in Anacortes. So even though housing doesn't seem always directly related to climate, or the first thing you think about, that any policies that would challenge the ability for the city to continue to grow and provide affordable housing would have a negative outcome for vulnerable populations. So we wanted to really highlight that was a really key aspect, and why we included housing policies in the list, even though the city's already sort of doing a lot, because we really wanted to highlight that was a key need for the vulnerable communities, based on the analysis and our work with the climate team. The potential for more significant health impacts in vulnerable communities and sensitive populations. So vulnerable communities can be defined broadly, but it includes lower income communities, and then sensitive populations really captures, and it can be broader than that, but that's kind of for the Commerce definition that they've provided, although that is also broad. Sensitive populations really comes from the vulnerability analysis that we did, which pulls in seniors, young children, pregnant women or pregnant people, the other more sensitive populations that may not be considered vulnerable in the other metrics, but need to be considered that they can have exacerbated climate impacts. Tribal communities experience cultural loss with climate impacts, or sorry, I should say, experience cultural loss with the climate impacts. So it's not just the physical impacts that their communities experience, but there's a cultural component of that. And we identified that both through the work with the climate team, but also reviewing the Samish climate vulnerability assessment that was done that really highlighted the challenges around mental health that are tied directly to climate impacts. So there's that potential for physical and mental health impacts in certain communities. Directly from, and I have the map here of the overall vulnerability assessment, downtown and eastern portions of Anacortes have that higher vulnerability, and that's tied a lot to sort of just where populations that may have lower incomes, that may be more sensitive to those areas, as well as the impacts from extreme heat, sea level rise, that cumulative impact of both, or the cumulative index that considers both the climate impact and then the sensitivity of those local populations. So those were areas that really popped up in that vulnerability assessment. And finally, the costs of taking climate-related actions can be a barrier, so particularly for lower-income communities. So that was thinking that really went into the development of these to make sure that we weren't requiring or exacerbating costs. And if we were trying to implement things that would require cost, thinking about how the city could partner or seek funding to identify programs that could help particularly those communities to achieve those actions. Any questions around that? Because a key part of the study, and I know we haven't quite presented it this way, so I wanted to just make sure it was kind of clear how what we were thinking about when we were thinking about environmental justice. Okay, so let's get into the list. We'll start with goal 1, which is actually an existing goal that was in the climate element. I'm just going to grab the list here so I can reference that as we go. So climate change leadership, build city and community capacity to become a regional leader in mitigating and adapting to climate change. So this really grew out of an existing policy that you had, and we kind of expanded it, we being through conversation with the climate team, the consultant team expanded it to pull in some of the guidance from Commerce that talked about the need to build local technical expertise and capacity. So that's the first policy, really focusing on how to develop local expertise to guide staff, whether that's within staff itself or also working in partnership with community groups, but ways to kind of build that local expertise. And then the other policy that we pulled into that is just the need for coordination. So local, regional, state, there's lots of opportunities. All communities are doing similar planning in Washington state, and so there's going to be a lot of similar types of approaches emerging from these climate elements, and a lot of opportunity to partner and seek partnerships in that work. Anacortes definitely doesn't have to do about this alone, and so that's a real opportunity. So we're kind of thinking of this first goal as sort of more, I don't know, administrative is the right word, but just kind of this, that there was a desire, there was an existing policy to be a leader and thinking about how that could, how the climate element is, how that would continue to develop and what you would need to do to support that.
So as you're going through here, are you looking for our thoughts about these, or are you just presenting them to us?
Definitely looking for thoughts. I mean, I think the discussion is here ahead of the hearing next week, so yeah, definitely would love.
Okay.
Yeah.
So commissioners, do you have any thoughts about CE 1.1 or 1.2?
Chairman Martin?
Yes.
Actually, mine is relative to the goal CE-1, and I know this language existed in our 2016 plan, but Anacortes only has so many resources. We put language in here that says we want to be a leader for the region. We'll be lucky to take care of ourselves. So I'm a little puzzled why we have such big ambitions.
It was an existing policy, so this isn't one that we brought to the table. This was in there, and we were looking at that, and definitely heard that sentiment from the climate team. So what we brought to it was understanding what would the city need to do to continue to play that role. In order to retain this policy in the climate element, it was in the environment and conservation element, so it's moved over to the climate element. In order to retain that policy, what would we need to do, or what would the city need to do to address that? But yeah, hear your feedback for sure.
And I have just in interest of trying to just use less words is always better to me than more words that say the same thing. Under 1.1a, continue to align with the guiding principles of the climate element. Well, you've listed the guiding principles. I don't know why we need an A. It doesn't seem like that's necessary. The rest seem fine.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when we drafted it if the guiding principles would be as part of volume 1 or in a different, so we wanted to kind of acknowledge them. But if they should be, I guess the question would be, and I think we heard this at the last meeting, so maybe we don't need the question, but that those should be for front and center in the volume
And
1.
at least on our tracker,
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah. So that should be something that's part of volume 1. You would want to see kind of the goals and the introduction of the guiding principles before you get into the. Yeah, okay.
And I have a little typo if you want it.
Oh, sure.
No big deal. On CE 1.2, A, coordinate with local jurisdictions, tribal governments, ports, state and regional agencies, et cetera. The tribal and the ports should be lowercase because they're not titles. I know, it's the English in me.
There may be a few, we developed this in the list, I think we sent an updated list with the track changes, and so we were trying to manage what has changed, and so there's lightly more of a scrub for
No
those
big
kind
deal.
of things, but appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other things on 1 before I go to the next? Okay, great. So the next goal is promote climate awareness and community well-being. So this is raise awareness about climate change and protect community health and well-being from the impacts of climate-exacerbated hazards so that vulnerable populations do not bear disproportionate health impacts. So this is a big environmental justice kind of meeting that requirement. And some of the pieces that we wanted to highlight there is raising awareness about potential community health and impacts from wildfire smoke and extreme heat. In different ways of addressing that in the community, considering outdoor workers and different planning efforts the city could undertake through partnerships. And then prioritizing certain community members for actions to mitigate wildfire smoke and extreme heat by addressing some of those sub-bullets. And I think this one goes on to there's a few more after that, but since these are on the screen, I'll stop there and just see any questions on those two before we move on.
I guess just to your point about the words, I don't know, it just jumps out at me right away that there's raise awareness, raise awareness, raise awareness. I don't know if there's any chance to streamline that at all. It's not jumping out at me how to do it, but at some point, just repeating, so.
And I guess one question, and maybe a question for John Coleman as well, is to whether you'd want to see those changes done ahead of the hearing on the 23rd, or whether you would want to present this list. And so that would be a kind of a question I had as to workflow.
Does the Planning Commission have a preference? I don't really have a preference. I can't think if there's a positive or a negative either way. I'm inclined to think if you really want to see a change, maybe the whole Planning Commission wants to weigh in before we make changes. You could do that tonight, but
Well, that was actually part of last meeting. I wondered if this was the only opportunity that we would have to look at this before the public hearing, and it sounds like this is our only opportunity, at least according to the schedule now.
yeah, but you can also talk about it the night of the public hearing too.
Yeah.
So you have 2 opportunities to speak to this, and then later it'll come back as the full chapter,
Right.
and you'll get more opportunity to look at it.
Chairman Martin?
Yes.
I think that's a great question that's been posed. I'd suggest that we see how many changes we come up with by the time we get to the end and revisit the question about whether it's worth making changes before the hearing.
Yes. Head nods, yes.
Great, perfect, all right. So just rounding out the other policies that are under that goal: foster community building activities to promote sustainability and resilience by strengthening social networks, reducing isolation and promoting mental health and well-being. That grew out of not only conversation or things that we saw around those kind of health concerns, but also conversations with the climate team. And then engaging vulnerable communities, including seniors, low-income residents, to raise awareness and deepen local understanding of climate change. So different ways of going about that. But that's really just sort of making sure you're continuing to talk and engage with those populations. I know the city's already doing that, but just continuing that work, as that there may be information barriers, understanding barriers, and not assuming that you understand all of the barriers that those communities may be facing. Oh, sorry. Any addition or changes to that one before we move on to 3?
Keep going.
Okay, great. Okay, third goal, resilient cultural resources. Ensure that cultural resources and practices, including historic sites and culturally important traditional foods and natural resources, are resilient to the impacts of extreme weather and natural hazards worsened by climate change. So this is really identifying, we worked with staff to kind of identify from the commerce measures where the priorities were here, and through discussions with the climate team, but really focusing on work with tribes and understanding, or local tribes, to protect and enhance and restore local ecosystems that meet treaty rights and conserve culturally important resources, establishing and maintaining that government-to-government relations or maintaining with local tribes, and considering the important potential for impacts to historic and culturally relevant sites or buildings when developing projects or resilience plans. Any questions on those?
I have a couple questions on
Yeah.
this one. On C 3.1, I can understand protect, and I can definitely understand restore, but I'm not sure how do we enhance local ecosystems to meet tribal treaty rights. I didn't know how do we do that.
A little outside of my area of expertise, but I imagine it could be, not sure but making sure that for restoration is often driven by protecting salmon, or certain, the ways that salmon restoration plans can kind of help inform and help sort of buffer. So there are ways to kind of make sure your systems are working as well as they can to kind of promote. So I think that's what that is intended to address. But we can provide more. I think that one is in the Commerce Guidance, so we can provide more background.
Yeah, I just didn't know whether enhance belonged there. Again, if we're looking at priorities, and how do we spend our limited resources?
Yeah, I think, we can certainly.
Another question on 3.3. Do we have a list of culturally relevant sites in Anacortes? And if not, can we get one?
We were referencing a good story map and conversations with the climate team, but a story map that the Samish Indian Nation has on their website, I believe it's on their website, of just some key sites in the area that included relevant sites, but I'm not sure that's fully comprehensive. We also did a survey of kind of historic sites and culturally relevant sites for the project. But
the reason I'm asking is because if we knew which sites are culturally relevant, that would impact possibly zones, possibly all kind building regulations, all kinds of things. If we don't know, then it would seem that every time we, meaning the city, try to make a change in something, we would be beholding to the tribe to make sure, I mean, it makes sense to me that we need to know what are the culturally relevant sites.
yeah.
And that would help us in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's a great feedback. I think when we talk to staff also, and what brought in the kind of improvement project aspect is there's an understanding whenever you're working in the shoreline environment that is a potential area where there could be cultural resources. And so so I think there's this idea of developing a list is a great idea of sort of known sites, but I think also projects, whenever you're working in that environment, certainly particular environments right along the shoreline, need to understand that there's that potential to encounter cultural resources, and that's a need to just awareness. And I think staff brought that to the conversation, so there is that awareness there. But that's why we were kind of framed the language in that way.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Nope. Okay.
Okay, CE4 is support ecosystem adaptation. Protect and restore coastal ecosystems, streams, riparian zones, and wetlands to increase the resilience of species, habitats, and communities to climate change and achieve a healthy watershed. So this is a really big one in how we're meeting kind of that minimum requirement 2, really focusing on these kind of some of these more ecosystem-focused measures or goals and policies really is how the climate element really achieves that minimum requirement. So considering future impacts from sea level rise and climate change when implementing shoreline restoration, that's going to have some relationship with the SMP once you have that as well, that update. Conduct a sea level rise vulnerability assessment with future updates for the critical areas ordinance or the shoreline management program, master program, excuse me. That can build on work we've done here, so that it doesn't have to be kind of a brand new, yet another study. It can kind of build on some of the analysis work that's done here, but fill in some key gaps around, particularly around natural areas, systems, and make sure it's reflecting the latest guidance from ecology. Develop and implement actions identified in city restoration plans and protect and restore riparian vegetation to really kind of help buffer provide shade and habitat connectivity and support functions that enhance resilience of streams. Also balancing the understanding that there is some local wildfire risk, so that was added to that policy as well to kind of bring in that consideration. Let me just check. Yeah, that's all that there is for that one. So
Okay, don't move away from that one. I know I am. Sorry. Do you have questions, Mr. Mills?
Just an observation, Chairman Martin. 4.1, consider future impacts from sea level rise and climate change. My understanding that sea level rise is driven by climate change, so just kind of pencil whipping the wording.
Yeah, that probably just needs an edit. It's more sea level rise and other climate impacts, I think was what we're trying to get at, that it's not just, but yes, good point.
I think
that
just
should
shorten it down to climate change impacts.
I think the sea level rise specifically there is really driven by that need and also that tying to that overlap with the shoreline SMP, wanting to make sure that communities are really incorporating that into the SMP. Yes, that's a great edit.
Okay, 4.3. You cross-reference to the ecology and conservation section. I think that's fine. I think it should be in one or the other. It doesn't need to be in both places. And on C4.4, I appreciate what people are trying to do in consolidating things, but on this one, it looks like the consolidation, to me, doesn't fit. So the first part where it ends with, and support other functions that improve the climate resilience of streams, seems like there should be a period right there, because while balancing the need to protect structures adjacent to forested areas and wildfire danger as required by the state wildland urban interface regulations, seems like that's like different. First one is talking about streams and the next one is talking about wildlife. So that second section, I just said it doesn't work together. Either keep it in EC 5.1 or add it to CG 5.1 or CE 5.1 for that, just that second section, I think.
I think they are related. Maybe we need to wordsmith it. This one is, this was a frequent topic to, so we want to protect the trees around streams and wetlands.
Right.
But at the same time, we also have to be conscientious of being fire-wise around houses. So balancing that need and desire to protect trees on the forested edges and around streams and wetlands, while at the same time balancing the need to protect houses from wildfire danger. So that,
I agree it's important. I just don't think they mesh together because, let's see, CE 5.1, if I can find it. Yeah, this one is adopt and maintain an urban forest master plan and implementing ordinances, including a tree canopy, blah, blah, blah. But it talks about item C, monitor wildfire risks, and you could put including the need to protect structures. So, you know, that phrase from CE 4.4. Yeah,
Okay,
it just is a different. It doesn't seem to me like it fits right there.
I think what we were
Not that
trying
it's
to
not
do-
important.
I think what we were trying to do is kind of reference it in both. In one, we're saying we want to protect trees, and then the other one, so in 4 point whatever. we're trying to
4.4.
protect trees around sensitive areas. And then in 5.1, we're saying we want to protect houses from trees. So we were trying to bring to light the fact that those two priorities do have, they are at odds in ways, so we wanted to put them together. That was a topic that came up quite a bit at the climate team. So I think that's what we were trying to achieve. I'm looking at the member of the climate team who is in on those conversations.
there could also be a way to add a sub-bullet to speak to that, maybe.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm speaking my opinion.
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
one person. There's 7 of us here.
Yeah, no, it just. All right, any other thoughts? Oh, yeah.
Mr. Stoneman, yeah.
Chairman Martin, just something that kind of jumped out at me on this one as opposed to the others. I actually like your words better on here. There are actual actions, like develop and implement actions. I feel like the first ones, there's a lot of just consider this or talk about this type of thing. And I feel like now we finally start saying, we actually want you to develop a plan, conduct a sea level rise vulnerability. So I don't know if that means you need to think about toughening up the words in the other ones to make them more actionable.
Okay.
But
Any other? I'm going to keep us moving because I know we have other stuff on the agenda today, so I might start moving a little faster, but please just stop if there's something you really want to discuss. But I want to make sure we have time for everything on the agenda. So 5 is resilient urban forest, enhance and maintain urban tree canopy for community health and climate resilience, and develop plans to reduce wildfire risk around the ACFL. So this is really thinking about growing the urban canopy broadly. So Anacortes has this amazing urban forest canopy, and then areas where there's a lot of impervious surface with less tree canopy. So this is really thinking holistically about canopy coverage across the city. And then it also includes thinking around wildfire and needing to develop plans to address that. Any questions or thoughts on that? Noting that the overlap with the previous conversation is relevant here.
On 5.4, I like Commerce's statement better because it's shorter and more clear. Support the development of community wildfire protection plans instead of what we're recommending here. Increase community awareness of local wildfire risks and collaborate with property owners in high-risk areas when developing a community wildlife protection plan. My opinion.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move on, but please slow me down if you want to discuss anything. Okay, so now we're starting to switch over to still resilience, but a little more related to energy. And this first one, the heading, promote energy resilience. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Coordinate with regional utilities and jurisdictions on increasing energy infrastructure resilience, including generation, transmission, and storage, to accommodate renewable energy opportunities, meet increased demand, and withstand and recover from extreme weather and natural hazards worsened by climate change. Most of these policies were identified, were sent to the city by PSE as recommendations for the climate elements. We've sort of consolidated and combined them into a shorter list for the ones that made sense. So this goal really talks about coordination kind of with PSE on those kind of regional, but also local in terms of grid and energy needs, transmission, kind of generation, those bigger energy questions. That's the context around that one. So really related to PSC. A lot of them relate really directly and sourced from PSC and then worked with staff to fine tune the language, or were emerged out of the meetings that we had with PSC through this process. Any questions on those?
Of course, I have lots of questions on this one. A week ago, or the last meeting, I said this is a really controversial topic, and now we're hitting in part of the big controversy when it comes to storage facilities for batteries. And that is in a couple of things here. And my read of the people of Anacortes is that having a storage facility for batteries is not something that we would be too agreeable to. At least that's my read. We know that there's one going in Cedro Woolley, and with a lot of controversy there. We know there's another one going in Mount Vernon. I don't think there's so much controversy there, but this one just has that little word "and storage," is speaking something I think pretty controversial that really needs to be thought through and discussed with the public in some way. And it's in several places in this section. So I don't know what the rest of the commissioners think about that, but it stands out to me as part of the really big controversy.
I got a question.
Go ahead, speak up there, yeah.
So is the battery storage recommendations or the actions that are going on because of fire concerns?
It's, I think it'd be, actually there was an interesting project is it Samish Island? That was actually, it can be used in different ways. I think it's I'm not an expert on, Beth might be able to provide more expertise, but I'll get it started. They can be different, storage facilities helps with kind of the resilience of the grid by sort of providing that local storage and just allowing for storage of energy and just helps with overall grid resilience and energy. There is the term microgrid comes up, and there's a microgrid installation that just went up on Samish Island. We had some pictures of it at the open house. It's quite small. It's a solar panel installation and then a small battery installation, kind of like a utility vault. A little bigger than that, but not significantly. And so that's more of the microgrid approach. So I think storage, I know some storage facilities are quite large, but I think these also can be quite small in terms of when it's more of a microgrid approach. So I just wanted to note that if the initial think is that these are going to be large, massive facilities, I think there's a range within that of what that could be.
I think the one in Mount Vernon is 22 acres, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So your point's well taken. I think the community should have a conversation, and we should address rules for battery storage facilities. You've probably heard of BSSs, battery storage facilities. The PSE is pushing for battery storage for grid stability. That's something that we heard from PSE. We understand that legislature may also be nudging the communities in that direction as well to make the grid more reliable and make power accessible in off hours. So it also does have advantages for that reason. So the scale of these do need to be addressed, because it could be small scale, like the microgrid stuff, where there might be small little capacitors or batteries here and there to just make sure there's enough juice at high times. Now, there's also going to be storage associated with the ferry terminal, we imagine, when they need to electrify. The boat's going to be there for a short period of time, and they're not going to be able to just pull all of that power off the grid quickly. I think the intended use would be to have some battery storage that they would also be drawing from. So I don't have details about that. We don't have any specific plans, but when you think of a Washington State ferry, those are much larger vessels versus, the Guaymas ferry, which will probably, we're presuming, I haven't looked at the plans, will also have some smaller scale storage. So it seems to be something that PSE is pushing for long-term changes to the grid system. And there seems to be they indicate that there's some traction coming from the legislature and the governor's office possibly as well. So we do need to address these in the long run, what scale we allow, and in what situations, create some zoning codes around them, in other words. But for now, it looks like storage is probably the wave of the future.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think definitely needs a conversation, and I guess I have comments on each one of these, but I think for the sake of time, this whole section, I think, needs to be looked at, and I'm really wondering also, I know that most of this came from PSE, and I'm wondering why it's the only utility that is mentioned throughout the document that I can see. I'm wondering why it's not, instead of saying PSE, why doesn't it just say local utilities? Because some of these could be addressed by other utilities, I think. But anyway, for me, this whole section needs to be looked at. Mr. Mills.
Chairman Martin, thank you. Yeah, I had some alarm bells going on in this section too. Yeah. The first one was this introduction of the term storage. And I felt, on one hand, it says coordinate with, which kind of mitigates, to use a term, the concern, but could be completely solved by just deleting the including generation, transmission, and storage, and just simply say, coordinate with regional utilities and jurisdictions on increasing energy infrastructure resilience to accommodate renewable energy opportunities. Just don't list the transmission and the storage and take that off the table. Mm-hmm. My thought. The second thing that hit me was I'm personally interested in down lights when it comes to street lights. And so when I read this section, I went, what happened to the street light comment? But I think it survives in the environmental section as a light pollution element.
Oh, I see. Yes, in terms of just, yes, that would still be, yeah, that is not as much of a climate element thing, but certainly an environmental consideration.
It has survived there.
Yeah.
I think I saw it later, yeah.
Yeah, we have information on street light from LED fixtures in the policies, but not on the demos.
Just the last thing on this section, on, again, the controversy part, on CE7, it talks about efficient technologies and support energy system transitions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And I know that that's what Beth also talked about as, one of the better bang for your buck. However, we do have an initiative of the people, 2066, which was the one initiative that actually passed, and that was about saving your gas stoves or your gas energy. So this is in opposition to that. So again, how to manage this in the midst of controversy would be helpful.
Yeah, can you just point me to which specific policy, just so I have the right slide up?
I think it's it's the actual goal, CE7.
Okay. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
we can, energy, so this is focused on energy efficient
Yeah.
buildings, promote renewable
Support
energy.
energy system transitions, mine says. Am I looking at the wrong thing?
Nope, yep, that's, yep, goal 7. And support energy system transitions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings.
That energy system transitions is, could be seen as in opposition to the initiative 2066.
This is, transitions can take different forms. We really focused on language that was focused on energy efficiency and not getting into the details of specific fuel.
Except that this is energy system transitions.
Yeah,
That's going from gas to electric is how I'm reading that. That's the transition. But anyway,
Make a comment. Just-
sure.
So on reflective that you're feeling like with that imposition, we're dealing with in the Washington Building Association level and the National Home Builders Association level legislation. They are fighting. They're fighting the removal of the gas. So they're trying to keep gas going, and it's full on battle right now.
Okay, so there's more controversy.
So let me,
pretty
if I
big.
can interject, this says to promote. This does not say end. So that totally mitigates all concern that it would be saying that we should get rid of natural gas. The climate element, in fact, very much does push towards using electrification of homes. And so that is what this is speaking of, is encouraging more energy efficient use instead of gas-fired furnaces, which are less efficient, and moving to heat pumps.
So
more
supporting
efficient.
energy system transitions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. What does that mean then?
That means, largely means changing from gas furnaces to using electric heat pumps.
Exactly.
And so that's what this goal is.
Which
is
is in
reaching at.
opposition to the initiative of
No, the
of
initiative
people.
was only about gas ovens, was it not?
I'd have to, I don't think so, but I might be wrong. It's happened once or twice before.
We're happy to take another look at the language here. I
Yeah.
think we were very careful. We were very aware of the initiative, very aware that there's also legal challenges, so this is an unresolved issue.
Yeah.
The language that's in the Commerce Guidance is more specific than this on this issue, and so
Yeah.
we were careful not to, in the language that we chose. But we're happy to take another look at it to make sure that we're not prompting controversy. But there is some inherent, when you're talking about electrification, is where you get, in terms of meeting the state's requirement, the climate element has to show that the city is, implementing policies to help you get towards the state target, and this is a big one that would help that. All right, I know this is a key issue, and so I'm hesitant to move on, but I do want to just keep us moving. This energy efficient buildings we've structured into kind of 2 sections: reducing emissions from new buildings, so really offering incentives to promote new buildings to include energy efficiency beyond the minimum code requirements, thinking of changes at the state level, thinking around city buildings and using programs such as LEED to really promote environmentally friendly approaches, and those pieces. And then the second section is reducing emissions from existing buildings, so that's where you were looking at prioritizing the weatherization and conversion of the most energy efficient water and space heating that we talked about. That actually draws from an existing policy that the city has, or the second part actually draws from the second policy, so we kind of linked those with the commerce element around coordinating to identify ways like a microloan or rebate or other program to sort of support that, those things, thinking around that challenge of cost.
And that one also includes the battery storage systems. 7.5.
Yes, and I think that in that context that there was a smaller, in battery. So when you put in, it's expensive, but when you put in a solar panel, you have the option to also put in a battery system to allow you to kind of store that energy and utilize it. So it's still a expensive investment at this stage, but battery technology is changing very quickly. This wasn't essentially thinking kind of large scale storage. This is really kind of at the building scale.
And at least it does say where feasible, so maybe that's our get out of jail free. So,
Yep.
I understand the desire for us to move to more efficient heating systems,
Closer to the microphone, please.
but we spend a lot of time talking about more affordable housing, whether it's new homes or whether it's rentals. And when you start making things like heat pumps or splits, which are basically heat pumps, mandatory, that's a major expense upgrade over other forms of heating and cooling systems, mostly heating systems. So again, in my mind, we have this conflict. We spend a lot of time talking about trying to make housing more affordable in our town, yet we have these stipulations or suggestions at best, where we're picking the most expensive way to do it. And I understand it's more efficient, but it's not making it more affordable.
Yeah, that is why we tied that one to the need for really thinking about programs to help support, and that's something that some communities, particularly in the King County area, are starting to do to implement. I know the city of Bellevue and I believe a few others are implementing programs to help lower income property owners or to transition to those systems. There's a lot of, in the new building codes, there are new requirements that's going to shift kind of new buildings in this direction. So the city is not, by doing this, kind of adopting local building code separate from the state or more advanced than the state. We're assuming that the new buildings are really covered by those building requirements. We're not proposing any additional requirements at the building code level to require it. We're really sort of thinking around, so the thinking is around existing buildings and what can the city do from a programmatic standpoint through partnerships or grant funding and coordination with others that may be taking on similar programs to sort of launch something like that.
I don't want to lose sight of the fact, though, you just said low-income housing. I'm talking about affordable housing.
Yep.
And they're not necessarily one and the same.
Yeah, I might have misspoke. I meant to make it accessible for lower income populations, I think.
And I'm just thinking about, it wasn't all that long ago that Cascade Gas was paying people to shift their heating systems over to gas.
Yeah.
It wasn't all that long ago there were incentives for water heaters. There still are, I think, for heat pump water heaters. But again, the utility companies have helped people get into things that we now are thinking maybe we wish they weren't in. So.
Yeah.
On the affordability issue, just to play devil's advocate to kind of, I guess just to stir up the conversation, the long-term affordability of the electric heat pumps and higher energy efficient buildings creates much more affordability in the utility bills and the long-term use of the house. So it's kind of, you pay more upfront for the electric heat pump and the additional insulation, but in the long run, you're paying much less in your utility bills. So, is it a wash? On the other hand, and then also, because the electric heat pumps are so prevalent now, the costs are coming down. I don't have any figures. I'm sure it's still higher. I don't even know. I don't want to get into that argument. But as that technology becomes more and more common, the cost comes down too.
The inclusion of increased resilience here, I just want to touch on this, is also intentional and relates to that kind of co-benefit for the resilience sub-element, because with the heat pump, you get air conditioning as well. And so when we're talking about communities that are facing higher temperatures, there is a benefit in that.
I keep hoping for those higher temperatures, but higher than they are right now here. But yeah, and again, I understand the principle. If your heating bill is $150 less during the winter because you have a more efficient heat system, that's wonderful. But if the cost of the house went up by $15,000 to get you there, you might not be buying that house. You might not be able to afford that house. Mm-hmm. So,
and the colder it gets, the less
efficient they are.
Is a heat pump. And they have a limitation where then we have to go to ancillary heat because we do have a cold weather climate.
Period.
Yeah.
I think your point is well taken. It's a trade-off there's unintended consequences. You know, there's always consequences to everything, and something that's looks good on one side might not be so good on the other. There are unintended consequences.
Okay, I want to keep us moving. I know we're already kind of pinching on time. So support energy resilience. So this portion is very similar in how I've phrased it to the PSC one, and that is a bit of an oversight on my part. So I think I'm going to want to find a new way to introduce this goal. But this is about supporting overall energy resilience by promoting local solar energy production, as well as other small-scale renewable energy, geothermal as an example, and battery storage. We've touched on this and definitely heard from earlier pieces that there may be some questions. So I would say, just given time, is there any kind of new questions that haven't come up? I know that there's some concerns around phrasing with, or we've heard loud and clear the concerns around battery storage, but are there other things that you want to flag here? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Resilient development. So this is promoting land use patterns that increase the resilience of the built environment, ecosystems, and communities to climate change, and ensure that development is resilient to climate impacts. So this is really thinking about making sure development is located in ways and how you can shape development to help increase resilience. Any questions on these?
I have a question on 9.1, and it's truly a question. Does this mean changing zoning?
Not under this, no. But we reviewed the policies are consistent with the land use element and the land use. So we're not proposing zone changes from the climate element. As a policy over the future, as you learn more, as impacts start to become more, I would say the one piece that is the more unknown is local wildfire risk. So just understand, you'll be learning more about that over time. But this is a policy to sort of direct development, utilities, and specifically infrastructure into areas where it's going to be. So I guess it's not as much around zoning, but certainly for utilities or infrastructure, we know that in coastal areas, you do have some low-lying areas where there are all vulnerabilities. So thinking about when you're locating infrastructure to make sure you're locating in areas where it's not going to be vulnerable.
And then off to the side, is your company working with the city on development policies as well?
We are working on the land use element for the comprehensive plan, if that's what you're.
Okay.
But we don't work with developers in the Anacortes area, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'm asking, working with the city on updating development policy.
Other than the land use element, yeah.
Just in the land use element?
Yeah. Currently, yeah.
Okay.
Chairman Martin.
You can just
I was
speak.
trying to remember whether we were down to 9.4 now that one. Are we talking about 9 in total?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Are we done with 9?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to repeat a comment that I made at the climate team meeting, and it received some support and some pushback during the meeting on 9.4, where we're considering acquiring properties or easements that have become vulnerable to climate-exacerbated hazards. When we invest in property, as investors, we all take risks, and the facts on the ground change over time, and sometimes we lose. I will require some convincing before I would move forward with, I'll consider it, but I have to be convinced, and at this point I'm not, that it would be appropriate to buy properties that become hazardous because of climate change.
I think the thinking, an example of this, I don't have all the ways that could work. I think one way communities are doing this is if there's a property that has become an impact and there's a structure on it, if there's an opportunity to acquire it and then turn it into open space. And so it could be a public benefit, and then you don't have it doesn't work when there are impacts to specific structures, but as an open space or it is a different type of use, it's very usable. So that's not necessarily the range of examples that could be, but that's an example of how you could keep that would be how the policy could be used in a way that's not necessarily increasing risk, but it's addressing it.
I mean, what you're citing is case by case.
Very case by case.
And living in Texas and being an active softballer, all the softball fields were in flood zones because that was a good use.
Yeah.
And flood zones got exacerbated by more and more impervious coverage in a fairly flat state, and climate change is going to exacerbate that further. So case by case, but philosophically, I'm not there. One voice.
All right, moving to 10. So this is reducing vehicle miles traveled, a key part of a requirement needing to meet. And this is a goal where we've brought in a lot of different aspects from the commerce guidance, largely because they are supported both by the land use element and the transportation element. So this is one where we've actually kind of combined a lot of different policies or measures that commerce identified. And the reason we felt okay with doing that is because they're well supported in the land use and the transportation element. There was a strong alignment with policy. So we're not advocating for changes based in this climate element based on what you have. This is just aligning and showing how you're meeting this goal with the cross references to the land use element. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing vehicle miles traveled, fostering efficient land uses, and promoting active transportation. So 10.1 really focuses on those land uses and lots of cross references. All the sub letters relate to policies that you already have in this update with your land use element. 10.2 is around diversifying housing options. Again, those aren't proposing new things, those just align with the direction of the housing element. 10.3, multimodal transportation plans, again, aligning with what the transportation element is proposing and connecting those cross-references, or connecting to that via cross-referencing. For the Skagit Transit, to prioritize and promote public transit, also supported by transportation element. Number 5, 10.5, promoting the use of existing transit resources such as the school bus or transit routes to reduce car trips. That was an idea that merged out of the climate team, so we added that in. But that's the one that is sort of specific to this element of this section. Any questions on that?
It just brings up, I know Mr. Mills has asked for a glossary, brings up that active transportation. What exactly is it?
I can read the definition. I think the response that we had for that is that totally heard the feedback, but the specifics of that, we're not looking to get into the specifics of that in the climate element, that's really the transportation policy to address. Here, we're really just saying the climate element's doing this, and we want to get credit for it in terms of, from the minimum requirements, we want to acknowledge that the transportation element is doing this, so we want to connect it to the climate element and say, we're doing this is how we're helping to reduce. We have really strong
I think just the question is, are we going to have not just in the climate element, are we going to have a glossary in the whole comprehensive plan?
I think the city is committed that there'll be a information I think the definition to support the comprehensive plan. I've heard that for the past, or maybe that hasn't been officially.
Weren't we talking about these specific definitions living in the transportation element, and we've already kind of hammered that all out in the transportation element, and we're using this kind of referring back to those definitions in the transportation element from here.
Chairman Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah, on several occasions I've brought up the desire to have a glossary of terms and definitions. I know we talked about it at some length in the transportation element. In the climate team, the consultants brought forward a glossary which was quite helpful. In fact, on my list of things at the end of the discussion on comp plan updates tonight, I was going to raise the question, which you just did, Chairman, of is the plan going forward to have glossaries for each section that requires it, or is there going to be one global glossary since terms appear in multiple areas, as we just witnessed? and then regardless of which direction that's going, if there are terms that those of us on the commission would like to see in that glossary, who do we give those to? So I'm expanding on your question.
Well, so you've asked it. I would be in favor. What about the rest of the commission?
I think we need a glossary.
Okay.
Definitely, because, even some that are more informed than others, which there's a big portion of our community that may not have been sitting through these, and some of these are contextual, that they can resource those and access those.
Okay. What about you guys? Okay, so it could be that we've got an informal recommendation from the whole commission, not just from Mr. Mills, that we would like to see a glossary of some kind, whether it's, individual sections or an overall. I'm fine with whatever you think would be better.
Sure.
Just along those lines, actually, on CE 10.1 under D, I was wondering what form-based codes are.
Form-based codes are development regulations that kind of focus on the shape and form of buildings to help kind of guide development. And the city makers actually help the city develop kind of a form-based code. So this is maintaining and updating that.
Okay.
So it's something you already have. This is just sort of capturing the fact this is a commerce measure. Like we've already done this. We can continue. We want to get credit for
Good.
it.
Well, and I mean, I'm just a layperson.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know what form-based codes mean.
Sure.
So speaks to the glossary.
Yeah, we can certainly include pieces like that in the glossary or identify where that's helpful. I also want to just note that HB 11, so many terms are defined in HB 1181, and it is to apply to the whole comprehensive plan. So we won't be defining things just for the climate element that would be defined differently. That would not be aligning with commerce. So it would be a glossary to support the entire comprehensive plan.
And just English on D. A is encouraging, B is implementing, C is prioritizing, D should be maintaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip to promote electrification and alternative fuels. So this is another emissions reduction goal so focusing on transportation by supporting transition to electric vehicles and encouraging the use of cleaner fuels in marine transportation. So really focusing on EV transition plan as an initial step and expanding electric vehicle infrastructure. And then coordinating and supporting the emission sources where there are less immediately available things, but kind of having a longer term approach to that. So that's 11.5, kind of supporting and coordinating with local entities to kind of support that transition to cleaner fuels over time. But the more immediate next step here would be the focus on the EV transition, doing the planning work for that first and then implementing that. Any questions on that? That one's a little more clear. Okay. Resilient transportation systems, so now back to resilience, ensuring that the local transportation system, including infrastructure, routes, and travel modes, can withstand and recover quickly from the impacts of climate change. This is SR20 flooding impacts, so coordinating with WashDOT on that. And we'll also be recommending a slight update to the transportation policy they have a policy around coordinating with WashDOT there, so we are recommending adding that to that bullet list as well. And thinking about, we heard a lot about impacts to trails, and then there's an opportunity to connect with stormwater and thinking around stormwater impacts through this as well. I believe that's also a priority measure from Commerce. Any questions on that? Okay. Emergency response, enhancing emergency preparedness, response and recovery, efforts to mitigate risks, impacts associated with extreme weather and other hazards. So this is just monitoring plans, mapping transportation infrastructure that's vulnerable. We're very mindful of Fidalgo Island being an island and having limited routes off island. So just being aware of the thinking around climate impacts in that overall emergency preparation. We know that I believe the Anacortes Senior Activity Center and the library have had some kind of emergency service function or resilience hub, so continuing to offer that to allow communities that may not have access to AC at home, access to that in hot weather or when there's wildfire smoke. And then debris management wasn't a huge high priority, but it does help meet kind of a waste management from the sectors, and also can be issue and just sort of dealing with debris post-event is something that a lot of communities struggle with. I'm going to just keep moving. So resilient economy, ensure that the local economy is resilient to climate disruptions and fosters business opportunities associated with climate mitigation and adaptation. This really grew out of feedback that we heard from some of our listening sessions. So ensuring the emergency management plan kind of thinks about business needs and is understanding the economic impact, not just kind of the physical impact of other aspects of the community. Continue to engage businesses to understand what those local needs are, and then recognizing the value of the existing skilled labor here as part of the transition and implementation, meeting climate goals over time. And there's some opportunity, I think, to cross-reference some policies that will be in the economic development.
I must admit, I ran out of gas at this point.
Yeah,
so
I understand. Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to connect. That it's it's not just you need to think about
or I
economic
lost
development.
my charge.
I
One or the
understand,
other.
understand. We're almost there. We're almost there. Okay, 15 is protecting water infrastructure, protect and preserve water quality and quantity from drought, extreme heat, and other hazards exacerbated by climate change. A lot of work is being done already, so this is just making sure it has a presence in the climate element and really just supports that work over time. But we weren't. A lot of this work has been underway, so it's really just continuing to do that work and acknowledging it. And that's the last one. I had a few slides that we'll talk about. We don't have to talk about tonight because I want to get to other things, but that has to do that second part of the chart where we're making recommendations for other elements, but there'll be other meetings to be able to address that. So we don't need to go into that tonight unless there were specific questions on that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Chairman Martin,
Yes.
one more comment on the climate, if I might. We've used the word prioritize quite a bit, sprinkled throughout. In our guiding principles, we had a principle which was feasible and action-oriented, assessing the feasibility of strategies and prioritizing them based on overall economic and environmental costs and benefits to balance near-term results with long-term. In the climate team, we never got to that stage of even putting in place a process for actually prioritizing. We only have so many resources, and so I went back and looked at our existing plan. And it has a table in it on implementation back in 2016, which works its way down through the plan development, plan implementation, and then has some pods below that. And nowhere is there a process for prioritizing. I counted 63, 59 sounds better than 63 just within the climate section. I didn't bother to try to count how many we're going to end up with in the overall comp plan. But we have this menu of several, it's got to be 200 or 300 by the time we're done, elements and sub-elements, goals and policies that somehow we're going to have to figure out a process, a method for prioritizing, because we can't do everything.
Yes.
Is that somewhere in the process before we get to the end of this year, or is that something that's going to have to come later?
Yeah, in the it's written, I think, into the language a little bit, and so we can work with revisions to make it a little bit more clear. But it also, in the climate element, we're going to be identifying some near-term strategic actions to kind of help. So the EV transition plan, there's the ones where they're very clear, action-oriented. The sea level rise assessment, those are some of the key strategic near-term actions that help kind of guide and shape the next steps. So we are thinking about how to include in the climate element a little bit more. But I think there's also that idea of things can evolve. You can't predict all the pieces that are going to evolve over the course of the plan, and so we didn't want to assume too much on that front. So we will be including in the climate element a few kind of near-term actions that we recommend the city really just get started here on these subset of things, and that will help you kind of select what the next steps are.
It's not just the climate element, it's all the elements
Right.
have come with costs, and we as a community are going to have a way of prioritizing capital budgeting, whether it's operations or capital budgeting. Here's the amount of money you have, here's the priority of ranked by cost benefit. I can afford down to here, I can't afford this stuff down here. So right now, if we have hundreds of these things sticking on the wall without a method for prioritizing them, it's going to be like you can, I remember growing up in Sunday school being told you can prove anything with the Bible. So if I've got a project that I want to argue in favor of, I can say on page 75 of our comp plan, it says this is a priority. well, there may be other higher priorities, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But we can pick and choose, and that leaves me troubled, so.
Yes,
It's more philosophical than just climate.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing we can do in that is bring in those co-benefits that we, like, shared lightly, that we haven't kind of brought in a bunch, but really highlight what the co-benefits of a lot of these goals, that it's not just you're doing this to meet your climate goals, that it has all these other co-benefits to the community. So we can do a better job in the final climate element of really highlighting that aspect. And maybe that's part of that strategic next step action, is by doing these actions, not only are you meeting climate goals or taking those first steps, but you're also providing all of these other co-benefits that you get with that. So we can do a better job with that. Anything else?
I have a general question.
One more question.
Just out of curiosity, this was at the very beginning of the meeting, when we were talking about taking the homes that are on natural gas, obviously we want to convert them over to electrical. What did you currently know what the percentages of homes in Anacortes that are natural gas heated?
I don't have, Beth, are you still on the line? I don't know. I actually don't.
I'm still here. Yeah. We don't actually have that split. We have natural gas sales to residential customers, which the bulk of that is heat, water and air heating. So there's like a teeny bit that goes towards cooking and other stuff. But I don't have a good way to convert that from, I don't have it on the top of my head. I could probably figure it out. Like based on like energy usage for the region, but I don't have like, this is how many homes in Anacortes.
Yeah, I wonder if that's accessible to the gas company, if they're cooperative with the sharing that information. Because I mean, what is that percentage? Because then now if we go, hey, let's turn this over, can our grid support it? If we go, let's move, say we're at a 60% natural gas, well, let's convert them over to electric. We can't handle that.
Yeah. Well, I also
Well,
think,
we did meet a bunch with, we talked a lot to PSC on that very question of like, can you handle this electrical load? What would that look like?
Yeah, because when we increase, that stability goes down. And then that increases repair and upgrades, which increases costs.
Sure. Yes, there's cost at all, but PSE was pretty firm that they had the capacity for that kind of thing. That what they showed us was a pretty large excess capacity for Anacortes.
and that also is the reason why we included all of those PSC goals, is to
Yes.
continue that coordination with them to make sure that as the city starts to enact policies or starts to see movement on these, that there continues to be the access to that power, that there isn't a question. So that was part of that.
Stability is incredibly important in
Yeah.
Anacortes with an aged population.
Yeah.
So-
I also just want to fully clarify that that's a policy. By including that, we're saying promote, that the city can kind of create programs to make that easier, but that is entirely actions communities would take. The city is not in any way mandating that people have to change their systems. It's just trying to increase and promote the ability for the community to do that. I just want to make sure that's fully clear, that we're not trying to create a requirement for that. What we're trying to do, city here, is explore how the city can promote that in the community, but not a requirement.
Thank you.
The PSC's ability to handle future electrification, we drilled that into them many times, and they like was already stated, they're firm that they can. This is not a city of Anacortes thing. This is the statewide, and the state legislature has been working with PSC to make sure that that they're able to do this. It's also part of, PSC needs to change their, how they generate power too, and be, changing to electric heat pumps, for example, if every house eventually does so, that doesn't reduce the carbon emissions into the environment unless PSC cleans up the grid and isn't using natural gas and coal. So they're already doing the hard work of cleaning up the grid, and then the benefit happens at the local level, and they're being told that they need to be prepared by the state, so they're preparing for it. I have one question for Katie. On the agenda tonight, we're talking about our goals and policies for the economic and conservation, the environmental and conservation element. And what I anticipate the Planning Commission is going to notice is that we've eliminated a handful of goals and policies from the environment and conservation element and say we're putting them into the climate element. So we've been working with Katie. I believe they should be reflected in the goals and policies that we just went over tonight. But if they're not, we'll make sure that they are.
Yeah, the tracker. It's not in an easy order. You have to kind of, but they are noted in the tracker when they were, and some of them got combined or kind of evolved into pieces. But those are addressed.
Yeah.
But if you see something or have questions, we can follow up.
Yeah, I tried to I'm sorry, Chairman Martin.
Yeah.
I tried to cross-reference between where they were being removed from and where they were going to. And I, too, ran out of gas, and I'm in the process of converting to electric to try to go back and figure it out.
Well, we'd be happy to use your analysis to make sure that we've done it properly. Thank you.
Actually, I got through this section. This was easier.
I got about halfway through when you go to the
Cross-referencing.
6B.
Oh,
And there's references to being eliminated and transferred
Yeah.
into 6A, climate. And there's nice columns that give you cross-references that you can try to trace back and forth. So you can sit there side by side. And I got about halfway through that process, and I'm waiting for electrification to get me. It was a tough sled, but it was there.
thank you again for all your work and explanations, and please thank Beth as well. It's a huge job, and it has huge implications as well. So we want to make sure we get it right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Beth. All right, so we're not going to go over the environment and conservation, correct? It's item B on here, 6B.
Are you suggesting that we take it off of the agenda, or I was stepping up here expecting to move into it? So it's your meeting, however you
Oh,
want
I
to do it.
thought you were moving for item 7, Planning Department update.
I'm prepared to talk to you about the environmental and conservation element goals and policies
Okay,
tonight, if you're willing to do so.
is that all right? I think we can do this one fast. Faster.
Oh, most definitely. So, did you want to kick this off, or are you waiting for me?
I'm waiting for you. You're at the
All right.
speaker's podium.
Well, thank you. The computer's doing something weird right now. It's supposed to be, there we go. So tonight we're doing a similar process to what we just did with the climate element, and that is we're reviewing the goals and policies in the environment and conservation element. So these goals and policies have been existing already, so we didn't create them anew. So the idea was that we're going to present them to the Planning Commission for your review and see, and we've made some recommended changes, but the idea behind this one is we didn't make any major changes. Largely what we're proposing here are small edits to make it more readable or clearer, Small edits to meet be consistent with the climate element and other elements. Maybe we've achieved some of these things, so we're altering the language a little bit. So there's no wholesale changes. The big things you'll see as you go through here, you probably see a bunch of strike-throughs. And then on the tracker document, it will say that's been relocated to the climate element, for example. Lots of these are stricken only for the purpose that they're being moved. But this tracker document, which I have up on the screen, will tell us what happened and why we've made those suggested changes. So do you have any questions before we move into the draft changes to the goals and policies of the environment and conservation element?
I think move forward.
And we will again bring these for a public hearing at a later planning commission meeting. I think the intent is at the next planning commission meeting, but that, you know, with the climate with the climate element goals and policies, if that takes too long, this may get bumped. So we'll see. But that is the intent right now, and I think that's just the way we're going to move forward. So you can see that this is broken up into goals and then subsets of policies, just like we had. On page 1 here, there's not any significant changes, so I'm going to just move along to...
Chairman Martin?
Yes, Mr. Mills.
Under Goal 1, a couple of things. One is we're acknowledging tribal governments by listing that separately when it's a local or regional government. If we're not listing other local or regional governments, there must be a reason that we're separately acknowledging a tribal government.
Which policy in particular?
Goal 1, Policy 1.2. I thought you were going to skip to the EC2, so that's why.
So I'm on EC1. So you said EC 1.2, work cooperatively with local, state, regional, and federal governments and community organizations to protect and enhance the environment. Oh, and we added tribal.
Yeah.
Because they were missing. so that's, you know, we want to acknowledge and respect the tribal governments that we work with regularly in the area.
Do you have anything else, Mr. Miller? Let's just do it goal by goal. So in Goal 1, any of the policies under Goal 1? Going once?
Well, I've got lots of notes, but it's pencil whipping.
Okay, let's just go to Goal 2.
So Goal 2 is marine waters and shoreline. We changed it to shoreline resources to be more accurate.
I have a comment on the new policy in between 2.1 and 2.2. Seems like this should be in the climate section. Assess the sea level rise, vulnerability of wetlands, aquatic vegetation, beaches and dunes, and other valuable natural assets, and collaborate with landowners and partners to support adaptation. It's in the climate element, I think. Oh yeah, it says it's in C4.2, so I don't know why it should be in this one too.
And one other note here that is a reminder, we were talking about the shoreline master program. So one of the major changes to the shoreline master program is kind of a formatting change. Right now, the shoreline master program is its own standalone document. The revised one that the city's been working on, and it's already had a bunch of public hearings and is just about ready to hit go on it. It changes from a standalone document to two separate documents. Well, breaking it apart into two, I should say. It will take the goals and policies that exist in that shoreline master program and move them into the comprehensive plan as shoreline goals and policies. And then the regulations part of the shoreline master program will be moved to the actual Anacortes municipal code. So they'll be easily accessible with the rest of our municipal codes. It is maybe not, it's fairly standard practice, I'll say, for a shoreline master program to be a standalone document. And I think it's a really compelling reason to put the goals and policies with the comp plan and then the rest of the regulations in the shoreline master program into the code with the rest of the code. So when people are looking at it, they know it's all in one place. They don't have to go find another document. So you'll see some comments here, under the one that you just pointed out, the new one. It says, cross-reference to climate element CE 4.2, consider relocating to the shoreline element during the SMP update. So we'll have a separate shoreline element of the comp plan that will be an outcome of our shoreline master program update. But I have your note on this one, this new policy, and we'll see if we just put it in the climate element.
Anything else? Any other comments about goal 2? Okay. Goal 3?
All right, so goal 3 is water quality, protect and enhance water quality. Wait a second, so I went one more page, sorry, it's goal 3 is natural hazards. This moved 2 pages, I apologize. Reduce exposure to the impacts of flooding, erosion, landslides, and seismic events.
I have a question on policy EC 3.2, where it talks about frequently flooded areas, including the 100-year floodplain. I know the 100-year floodplain is clearly delineated. Are frequently flooded areas also delineated somewhere?
No. So the 100-year floodplain is, a technical drawing on the FEMA FEMA maps that show where those are, and those go on, shorelines and rivers that are known flooding rivers. We don't have any mapped floodplains in any of our creeks in Anacortes, though we do have 100-year floodplain in various parts of the city, including Skyline, Ships Harbor, and maybe a little bit down in Fidalgo Bay. But we don't have any riverine flooding. So frequently flooded areas might refer to places that are not on those FEMA maps, but we know flood.
That was the question behind the question, because this policy says to plan for and regulate development within these frequently flooded areas, which seems like it's pretty open to interpretation. I don't know. I think that one is worth looking at. And also that second sentence, consider climate change, including sea level rise, extreme precipitation, blah, blah, blah. That sentence seems like that belongs in the climate section as well. because it's, I don't know, it's not directly related to the 100-year floodplain, or maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong on this.
Well, it would be both. As far as shoreline goes, the 100-year floodplain may change, the coastal flood zone may change based on future sea level rise. I'm not aware of any changes that FEMA's interested in, putting on, making river flood plains in Anacortes.
Maybe it's fine, I don't know. Oh, actually, your next policy is to, when my question was, do we know where the frequently flooded areas are? And the next policy is to identify them.
So that's groundwater flooding, that's different. So that's something straight out of the climate element, out of the climate language. That is a definition, I believe, for groundwater flooding. We talked about this recently. I think it's defined in the climate language, and that is areas that the groundwater is now higher than it used to be because as sea level rises, it changes the hydrology inland, and you get some surprising groundwater changes based on the higher level of
The more
sea.
saturation, yeah.
In fact, we saw in one of our maps, I think we saw someplace up at like 250 feet elevation up in the middle of town, up on like H Street area or somewhere, I forget where. A small area that's not really developed, but the mapping shows that might see some groundwater flooding. Very surprising at that elevation.
Yeah. Okay. That one has a cost to it, but a lot of them do. Anything else on number 3?
Chairman Martin,
Yes.
my question is relative, it came to mind because of Goal 3, but Goal 3 has to do with natural hazards. Where in our planning process, in the comp plan or elsewhere, do we deal with, I don't want to call them unnatural hazards, industrial, marine, aviation, we have an airport. How do we plan for those hazards? Is there an emergency preparedness plan that's separate from the comp plan that deals with things like industrial or marine or plane crashes or?
So airports have crash zones around them. So those are areas that are considered hazard areas. I'm not sure how that affects our airport because we don't have large planes coming in, so it's less of a hazard than, say, on Whidbey Island, where there's very defined areas that are potential hazard areas from plane incidents. And then, just the fire department's prepared for the other, toxic type things that, I don't know that we have any other concerned areas of concern. And I suppose the refineries have their own plans and responses and equipment to handle incidents and those. But yeah, we don't have any overarching plans for human-caused catastrophes.
There is the CERT, Skagit County, and I believe the city also has community emergency
Response team.
response. There you go. Oh, there.
Not by the federal government, but not here, but it's transferable.
Okay, anything else for Goal 3? How about Goal 4? Nothing? Goal 5?
Yeah, no changes to the Goal 4 policies.
Question on Goal 5 EC 5.1. The new language says protect these natural assets in perpetuity. I just wondered, how do you protect in perpetuity?
Well, there's several mechanisms. One is conservation easements. Other is to create tracts that are, dedicated as non-developable. Like, for example, a native growth protection tract or native growth protection easement is an area that we've used a lot in the past around developments, residential developments, and so it's an area that's intended to protect some wild space. And so those tracts have restrictions on them.
Okay.
The only problem with that is you just have to hope the deer don't like the plants in your yard more than the ones that are in those natural areas. Just a comment.
Goal 6, there's one new policy. And goal 6 being surface water, maintain or improve the functional integrity of watercourses, wetlands, bodies of water, and their shores.
And this new policy is also in CE 4. I think it's probably best here, but it doesn't need to be in both places, in my opinion. Anything else?
I need help.
Okay.
The new policy reads, the word scale. I don't understand what that's trying to communicate to me. Identify, protect, and restore watershed scale processes. I feel like I should know what that means, but I have.
I think that's a little jargony.
Yeah.
So watershed meaning at a broad, the watershed, it already means in a larger scale.
Oh, restore watershed scale. Got it. Thank you.
Seven.
We changed the name of this to trees because it apparently did not have a title like a lot of these sections do, a lot of these goals.
And 8, looks like we moved to the climate element. Wholesale. 9, no changes. 10, no changes. 11, there's the light pollution that you spoke about. 12, no changes. And 13, I think these all go to the climate element.
So
Any other comments?
you were right, that one took a lot less time than,
Yeah.
even going through one by one,
Yeah.
it took a lot less time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Number 7 on our agenda is Planning Department update.
I wish I had some. It's good to see you again. We were here 2 weeks ago, and this is just a continuation of what we're working on then. We intend to have the public hearing at the next Planning Commission meeting on both the agenda items that we had today. And I don't think any significant, the Planning Commission didn't make any decisions last week, so there's no information that came out and went on and has been moved forward. So nothing to report on activity down the pike from what you've reviewed.
Anything from the commissioners?
I have to admit, at City Council meeting Monday night, I was eating dinner, carrying on a conversation with my spouse, and listening to the TV with the council meeting on. There was some reference made to some new hires or staffing change, and the Personnel Committee report made some comment. I should have backed up and listened to it again, but
No changes in the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department.
Okay.
I guess one, community note of interest is tomorrow is the chamber luncheon, the state of the city. And so the chamber luncheon will be here, and the mayor will be giving a presentation of the state of the city. And that is not televised.
Also, in the email, the city email I got, you passed on a invitation to the planning commission to attend an all-day session like June 6th or something?
Yes,
Could you
thank you.
elaborate on that?
North Shore.
Yeah.
North
so
Star.
North Star is North Star Group is all of the jurisdictions in the city that are trying to work together to identify all of the housing, homelessness, mental health, community services organizations that exist in the county, and help everybody understand how they will work together. And there's several aspects to North Star. There's the housing group. There's several different groups going on, and the mayor is the main appointee of that, and then he is, instead of sitting on all these subcommittees, he's appointed council members to a couple of them, and I, of course, help staff with some of that too, as does Stephanie Snyder, who is our housing coordinator, amongst other things, for the city, who also works in the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. So that symposium is something that they're putting out there as an educational resource for all of these different efforts that are going on. And if you look, they have several agenda. It's an all-day event, and they have several items on there, several tracks. So you can go to one of 4 different tracks that seem more interesting to you.
So we were told at the city council meeting that if a commissioner is interested in that the tickets are going quickly, and would it be all right if we notified Ms. Gleichman if a commissioner was interested?
Oh, no, you just go to their website and sign up as yourself.
Oh,
Yeah, it's open to the public.
Okay.
They sent an invitation asking, hey, can you let your planning commissioners know so that they can come? But we don't. The city doesn't need to register you. You can just register yourself.
I think
It's
there's
very
a link
simple.
in the email that you forwarded to us for registration.
There should be a link to register in there.
I just-
okay,
One more question, if I could.
okay.
About this time last year, I was the lone resident, the lone member of the public who attended an all-day off-site city council session. It was about this
The
time
city
of
council
year.
retreat.
Pardon?
City
retreat?
council retreat, yeah.
Is that on the calendar yet?
Maybe.
Okay. Who would I check with?
I think so. Maybe Jennifer Tottingham, probably best person. I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. I just don't know the date. I'm pretty sure it has been scheduled, but I don't know the date yet.
Anything else?
Just for the fellow commissioners, I can't speak to the North Star meeting, but the council retreat I found very informative and helpful, understanding the operations of the council, much more insight to how the individual council members think and process information. So if you have a spare day when that comes up on the calendar, I recommend it.
Okay. Well, I'm already hoarse, so this meeting is officially adjourned, 8:23.